My father owned that lake decades before the HOA ever came into existence. But the moment he refused to pay their brand-new lake access fee, they rolled in bulldozers and blocked our driveway. They thought they were dealing with nothing more than a stubborn old man. What they never imagined was that he possessed one forgotten document capable of bringing their entire neighborhood plan crashing down. Before we go any further, let me know where you're watching from by dropping your country in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button, because what happened next only gets more unbelievable. Now, back to my father, the lake, and the HOA that chose the wrong family to challenge. My father, Daniel Runn, purchased 17 acres of waterfront property in 1987, long before expensive homes and security gates surrounded the area. Back then it was nothing but towering trees, dirt roads, and silence. He built our family home with his own hands, one board at a time, beside a peaceful lake whose surface stayed as smooth as glass. He named it Miller's Rest in honor of my grandfather. For nearly 3 decades, that lake was simply part of our lives. We spent summers swimming there, caught fish every weekend, and watched the evening sky reflect across the calm water. Everything changed in 2015 when a development company bought the surrounding land and transformed it into a luxury gated neighborhood, complete with a homeowners association that suddenly decided our lake somehow belonged under its authority. At first, the harassment seemed almost laughable. We received an occasional warning letter or an official-looking notice, and my father brushed every one of them aside. He always smiled and said, "Just because a committee prints a logo doesn't mean they own a lake, son." Neither of us realized how determined those people were to prove him wrong. The trouble truly began when an envelope marked urgent HOA compliance notice arrived in the mailbox. According to the HOA, a revised subdivision plat now placed Miller's Rest Lake inside their common property boundaries. They claimed my father needed permission to fish, swim, or even walk along the shoreline that had belonged to him for decades. Completely confused, he called the HOA office. Their president, a cold and confident woman named Carol Ashby, answered without hesitation. "The lake is now community property, Mr. Ron," she said. "If you'd like to use it, you're welcome to apply for guest privileges like everyone else." My father nearly dropped the phone. Guest privileges. To access the lake he had owned since before most of those houses even existed. He demanded documentation supporting their claim. Carol calmly replied that the association's attorney would provide everything in writing. 3 days later, another notice appeared, this time attached directly to our dock with a bright red violation sticker. Unauthorized use of community waterway. That evening, my father spread every property record he owned across the kitchen table. Old deeds, surveys, tax records, everything. After staring at them for nearly an hour, he quietly looked up and said something I'll never forget. They picked the wrong lake. Unfortunately, the HOA wasn't finished. Only weeks later, they erected a chain-link fence across the access trail leading to our boat launch. The path we'd used for years suddenly disappeared behind lock gates, forcing my father to walk nearly 2 extra miles just to reach his own dock. Then the fines started arriving. $200 every single week for unauthorized recreational use. My father ignored every invoice. He refused to pay even 1 penny. Carol Ashby escalated the fight again. This time, she mailed a certified letter insisting the HOA possessed the stored development rights based on something called the 1994 Sunridge Plat Amendment, a document my father had never seen or even heard mentioned before. That was when he casually remembered something unusual. "Your grandfather kept an old metal box in the barn," he told me. "Just paperwork about the land. I never bothered opening it because I never had a reason." Something about the way he said those words made me stop. His voice had changed. Somehow I knew that forgotten box mattered far more than either of us understood. Meanwhile, the fines continued stacking up. The fence stayed locked. At every HOA board meeting, Carol Ashby proudly carried a folder labeled "Written Property," pending resolution, wherein the confident smile of someone convinced victory was already guaranteed. She had absolutely no idea what had been sitting untouched inside that old barn all those years. What nobody in that HOA boardroom understood was that my grandfather wasn't simply an old farmer who happened to own waterfront land. He had designed the original water system for the entire valley. And hidden inside that dusty metal box was a document that wouldn't merely weaken the HOA's argument. It would completely erase it. The following morning, my father and I drove to the old barn near the back corner of the property. After moving aside decades of forgotten equipment, we found the weathered metal box exactly where he remembered. Rust covered the hinges, but open without much effort. Inside were faded deeds, hand-drawn survey maps, engineering sketches, and one folder marked Miller's Rest Water Rights, 1962. We spent the rest of the day inside the county records office, comparing those documents with the HOA's supposed 1994 Sunridge Plat Amendment. While reviewing everything, the county clerk, an older woman named Diane, suddenly narrowed her eyes at our paperwork before looking back at the official records. Then she quietly said something that made the entire office fall silent. Wait a minute. These documents were recorded before the subdivision even existed. She pulled the original county plat filed in 1962, the year my grandfather officially registered the property. The paperwork confirmed ownership not only of the surrounding acreage but the entire lake itself, including exclusive water rights extending 50 feet beyond every section of shoreline. At that moment, one fact became impossible to ignore. The HOA's so-called 1994 amendment wasn't simply questionable. Legally, it could never have existed in the way they claimed. No subdivision amendment could overwrite or transfer property rights that had already been permanently recorded decades earlier. The county simply couldn't transfer a property that had never belonged to the original developer in the first place. My father looked over at me, shook his head, and quietly said, "They built this entire neighborhood on a story that was never true." Armed with those records, he requested an official meeting with the HOA board. Instead of admitting they were wrong, Carol Ashby arrived with an attorney. The lawyer, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, calmly slid a thick folder across the conference table and said, "Mr. Runn, we're prepared to make you a generous settlement if you're willing to end this matter quietly." My father never even touched the folder. "Why would I accept a settlement?" he replied. "For property that's already mine?" The lawyer's polite expression quickly disappeared. His tone became far more serious as he warned about a 30-day compliance deadline. He mentioned liens against the property, mounting legal expenses, and mandatory mediation, and my father refused to cooperate. Carol leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. "Everyone cooperates eventually, Mr. Runn." My father answered with the same calm smile I remember from my childhood, the one he always wore right before proving someone had made a terrible mistake. Before anyone could continue, he slowly stood up. "Before this meeting is over," he said, "there's something every one of you needs to look at." He placed a thick county-certified folder on the table. The moment Carol noticed the official county recorder's seal, her confidence began to fade. Then she saw the date, 1962, more than 3 decades before the HOA's so-called amendment had ever been created. Without saying another word, my father opened the folder and carefully arranged 3 documents across the table in front of the entire board. The first was the original 1962 deed, showing that my grandfather had purchased not only the shoreline, but the entire lake itself. The second was a county-certified water rights agreement, granting the Wren family exclusive control over Miller's Rest, including protected water rights extending well beyond the shoreline. Finally, he produced a letter issued by the county legal department earlier that very morning. The letter clearly stated that the HOA's 1994 Sunridge Plat Amendment had no legal authority because it attempted to assign ownership of land and water that the original developer had never possessed. The room became completely silent. Carol's attorney picked up the documents and read through them once. Then he read them again. With every page he turned, the confidence drained from his face. This can't be correct," Carol finally whispered. My father remained perfectly calm. "It isn't just correct," he answered. "It's officially recorded, county certified, and legally enforceable." He paused before delivering the final blow, "which means every fine you issued, every fence you installed, and every threat you made against my family was unlawful." The attorney immediately changed his tone. He began talking about possible misunderstandings, administrative mistakes, and a need to review internal records before making any further decisions. But the opportunity to fix their mistake had already passed. My father reached into the folder one last time and slid another document across the table. It was a formal notice of intent to sue. The lawsuit listed harassment, unlawful fines, trespassing, and property damage caused during the fence installation. It also identified Diane from the county records office as an official witness who had verified every historical document. The color disappeared from Carol Ashby's face. At that moment, the lake was no longer the biggest problem facing the HOA. Within 2 months, the association was forced to remove every section of the fence blocking our property. They officially canceled every fine they had issued and delivered a written apology acknowledging that Miller's Rest Lake had always belonged to the Wren family. Not long afterward, Carol Ashby resigned from the HOA board when residents learned she had pushed the entire claim without ever confirming the county's ownership records. The HOA was also ordered to cover the cost of repairing the damage caused by the fence installation, along with substantial legal fees. A costly reminder that assumptions are never stronger than official records. Today, the lake is quieter than it's ever been. Every year, on the anniversary of that boardroom meeting, my father sits on the old dock, watches the sunlight dance across the water, and repeats the same sentence. They try to take the one thing they never bother to verify. Sometimes the people who speak the least are the ones holding the strongest evidence. Throughout the entire fight, my father never once raised his voice. He didn't have to. The truth had already been signed, recorded, and locked away inside an old barn decades before the HOA ever existed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because the next HOA Revenge story is even more unbelievable.